Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is 5:30 in the morning on a lovely Tuesday morning. I believe I am recording everywhere and we are good to go. Hope everybody's doing all right today. Today we're going to be sketching this corn, this stalk of maize. It's not a stalk of maize, it's a cob. I don't know. It's not a stalk. The stalk is the plant part. But we're going to draw it. We have about 400 of these toys, and this is from Safari's farm crops set. I keep mentioning them in hopes that maybe one day they will decide to sponsor me. Safari, call me. Hi, Claudia. She says it's a sunny afternoon in Burl, Nassau. I have no idea how to say that. Nassau? I have no idea how to say that. Yeah, I have about 400 of these toys. The fun part for me lately has been going down the rabbit holes of studying the little factoids about them. I don't know, I get a huge kick out of, because I figure out, I find out what these things are, and then I go online and I just start digging. Like, I find out little factoids like we domesticated corn in Mesoamerica and South America some 10,000 to 13,000 years ago. But when we did it, the corn was the size of your pinky. The cob was the size of your pinky. And it took another 5,000 years to get the corn to be the size of your thumb, using selective breeding techniques. And then the corn that we have now, where the cob is almost a foot long, I mean, that's a relatively recent thing. You're talking sometime in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years. They managed to get the corn to be the size that it is now through selective breeding. And I just think that it's amazing that they were able to do that. Yes, the mini corn still tastes good. Actually, I think the mini corn tastes better. My dad's parents used to plant corn in the garden, and I would, a couple of times, the few times that I got to see them, because we didn't see them often, I would go out into the garden and I would eat the baby corn. The baby corn, and you eat it cob and all. It's super sweet, and they just let me do it. They never got on to me. They had to know I was doing it because they lived in town. It's not like there was the deer population coming into town to do it. And I sat on her back porch while I did it. She had a little concrete block stoop that I sat on. So I mean, it's not like I was hiding. But yeah, it does. It tastes really good. It's really sweet. and it is corn was one of the few grasses in the Americas that grew fast enough and could be sustainable enough to domesticate and support a population. And it's estimated about 80% of the Mayan diet was corn, was some kind of corn product. Corn was so important to them that they believed that the gods created them by mixing god blood with cornmeal to make a dough to form humans out of. And those are the kinds of rabbit holes I go down every morning when we do this. Every day. We pull one of these little toys out. Every day there's some kind of new documentary. There's a channel we subscribe to called Great Courses, that they offer college courses. The professors do their lectures in a high production studio, and it's the same lectures they would give in the college courses, but in a high value production. I'm not sure how you say that. I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. But you can take a whole college course, because the whole lecture is there. And so I find out what I'm supposed to be drawing, and the first thing I do is I go there and see if there are any lectures about it. And of course there wasn't excuse me, there wasn't a lecture about corn per se, except its importance to the Mesoamerican, except to mention the importance to the Mesoamerican population. But it doesn't stop there, because then you get to go down the rabbit hole of the Mesoamerican culture. You get to read about and learn about the warriors that lived, how they managed to decipher the Mayan language so that they understood what was going on. What happened to the Mayan books? The Spanish priests discovered the Mayan books. Mayans printed their language on paper made from bark, and the Mayan priests, the Spanish priests, decided that it was full of lies and blasphemy and burned them. And they only have 4 or 5 books left. And you learn that kind of stuff, and it's fascinating to me. Because if we had those books, we might have deciphered the language a whole lot sooner. That's pretty close. We might have deciphered the language a whole lot sooner. And the language, why is it important to decipher the language? Other than learning the history of the region and how they managed to cultivate corn to begin with. We learn the stories of their history and their culture, and can preserve those things. And we learn things like there was a general that for years his documented name was Smoking Frog. They called him Smoking Frog because there was a glyph that looked like a frog that they attributed to being his name. And so for years, all of the textbooks printed his name as Smoking Frog. And you have to wonder, you know, if you're an archaeologist, the Mayans would have known they were Mesoamerican. They would have known about bears. They would have known about boxes. They would have known about octopuses. They would have known about sharks. What would have been particularly frightening about a frog? That your most vicious general would be named Smoking Frog. And nobody doubted it. For decades, nobody doubted that this was this guy's name. Turns out his name is Born in Fire. But there are still textbooks out there that refer to him as Smoking Frog. Now, why is that important? I don't know if it's important. It's fascinating. As an archaeologist, how do you just decide somebody's name is Smoking Frog and just run with it? I'm not going to try. I'm not even going to attempt to draw every corn kernel on here. That is not what we do. But in the shadows, the corn kernels become more, the individual kernels become more prominent. Because it's the texture of the corn that casts a shadow on itself around that cob and gives it shape. I can shade the whole thing like a column. But if I don't provide these little indentations across here, it won't read as the right texture. See, and this side's too dark. We're going to have to come back in and lighten that line up. That line should actually kind of be lost in the horizon. And then we deal with the fact that it's a toy. And it doesn't have, like, the leaves should be paper thin, but they're not. They're plastic, so they have thickness to them. And since the goal is to draw what we see, I mean, sometimes I like to turn it into what it's supposed to be and not what I see. But I tell you what, we do have some stray lines we need to clean up. Sometimes I like the mermaid the other day. I think I spent more time making that into an actual mermaid than sticking with what was in front of me. Oh, you like the fox? Thank you, Claudia. Do 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 do. she says the fox is an 11 out of 10. 11. Because this one goes up to 11, see? But yeah, and then you go on and you learn more about the agricultural practices. See, they didn't have any large animals they could domesticate. Yeah, but nobody's talking. 7 people are here, and it's fantastic. My dad says he grew up chopping weeds in the cornfield and picking corn, and it was itchy hot, and he hated it. You know, Dad, you didn't have to chop corn. You get to chop corn. You didn't have to chop weeds. You got to chop weeds. What makes that funny to me, you guys, is my dad would come into my room at 5 o'clock on a Saturday morning and say, hey, we're going to go work hogs. Hey, we're going to go to the auction house. Hey, we're going to go. I don't want to go. You don't have to go, son. You get to go. This is one of those unique situations right here on this leaf where on the corn, the upper part, even though the light is coming from this direction, the upper part is actually darker than the lower part because of the light bouncing off the surface below it. You don't get that very often. But then you get to go down, because they didn't have, what I was starting to say, they didn't have, there were no large animals that they could domesticate. They had llamas. They weren't able to domesticate bison. The bison were too mean. You know, maybe given another 10,000 years ago, maybe they would have managed to domesticate the bison. But they got kind of a late start. As far as civilizations were concerned, in stages of civilization, they're actually considered to be about 5,000 years behind where the Europeans were. And it's not because they were any less intelligent, it's not because they were any less evolved or any less capable of understanding. It's because they didn't have excess food. Excess food is what drives the development of civilization, because you have to have excess food for trade. You have to be able to settle down and write stories and be able to spread your stories. And without that, your civilization doesn't flourish like it did in other places. And that is why the same thing happened in Africa, because there were no grasses to speak of, and so no large animals to grasses like corn or wheat, barley, sorghum, soy. There were no large animals to domesticate. That would cooperate with domestication. And so civilization, as we consider civilization, didn't develop as quickly. But the Mesoamericans were considered to be about 5,000 years behind where the Europeans were at the time of discovery by the Europeans. And it's funny, we always talk about they were discovered. I mean, they pretty much knew they existed themselves. It was the Europeans that didn't know they existed, right? So when the Europeans discovered that they existed, they just looked like primitive blasphemers ready for enslavement. But these people did manage to conquer their environment. They did manage to domesticate a few crops, specifically beans, squash, and corn, the three sisters. And they call them the three sisters because they would plant them together. And when they planted them, they would plant the beans and the corn in the same mound. They would mound the dirt up around them. They would plant the beans and the corn in the same mound around them, and the stalk would grow tall, the corn stalk would grow tall, and the beans would vine up around the stalk. And so the stalk would give the corn, or the corn stalk would give the beans something to grow up off the ground, and the beans would stop the corn from blowing over in the wind. And then the bean root system would trap nitrates in the ground. This may be too much science. Let me know if I get too into the sticks, because this is the stuff that fascinates me, that they figured this out. I mean, how we talk about them, we talk about them being 5,000 years behind the Europeans, but you have to understand their agricultural practices for what they had to work with were really quite advanced, because they were planting corn and beans in the same mound, so that the beans provided nitrogen in the soil for the corn and provided support for the corn stalk to not blow down. The corn provided a support for the beans to grow up off of the ground, to vine up into the air, as those types of beans need to have. And then between the mounds they planted squash, and the broad leaves of the squash trapped moisture in the ground and helped keep the ground temperature sustainable for the plants, for the other two plants. And then going back to what my dad was talking about, about the corn being all prickly and stiff, the the squash leaves, the squash had a lot of prickles on them too, and that would keep the deer and the raccoon at bay. And so the three plants benefited each other in multiple ways and allowed the Native Americans to have a higher yield and started to create an excess of crops, an excess of food, and allowed them to start having civilizations like Mayans, like Incas, like Aztecs. Like the Olmecs that were gone long before the Europeans showed up. And the Incas were gone long before the Europeans showed up. But their influence is still in what we know about the Mayan culture. Anyway, those are the rabbit holes that I get to go down when I do this every morning, and it just makes it so much fun for me. What's going on there? Oh, that's the edge of the plastic. What's going on in the chat? Claudia says, do you mean get to go to more you can go or where you're obligated to go? Mom says it's both. Get to go. You don't have to go. You get to go. It's a privilege. Come on. We're going to enjoy this day. We're going to go. She's talking about earlier when I said you don't have to go work hogs. You get to go work hogs. Yeah. It's to turn it into a more positive attitude. And you know, to this day, when I think about something I don't want to do, I will reframe it into, I don't have to do this, I get to do this. Lifelong impact of my father. But the real beauty of it is when I heard my 34-year-old son say it to his daughter. I don't want to go to bed. You don't have to go to bed. You get to go to bed. That is a generational influence. And I know full well that she will say it to her kids. And she's 5. How are we doing on time? 5:59. Look at us go. Right on time. Got a few lines to clean up, a couple of details to add in. The corn's not white, neither are the leaves. I just have a couple of lines here that I need to clean up. We need some of these lines to be a little lighter because I don't want to shade the corn so dark that, see that this line right here, you can't see. This line right here, the only way to eliminate that line as a line is to shade the corn to that darkness. And if I shade the corn to that darkness, then the corn will be too dark. And so I'm going to take some of that lead back. So that I don't have such an obvious line. And then when we go in and we shade our corn, First I'm going to shade the leaves and the stalk. Because they are not white. And when you do that, you want to be sure and go over the shadow too, because you want the shadow to be darker than the leaves. Right? And then we want to make sure we have a nice dark drop shadow here. And here. Like I said, we're not trying to get every piece of corn. We just want the implication that we have corn growing in rows on a cob, right? And now let's make the corn not white. Like that. And there we have it. And I can call that done. On Tuesdays I have to be just a little more strict with the time. We have a company meeting at my day job. What is today? The 13th? So on Tuesdays we have to be just a little more strict with the time. My phone is still broken, so I'm not quite able to use my phone to show you. I can show you what I see. Look at that. You can't even see what I see because the screen is so bright. I don't even know what camera's on. You can't even see. It's all red, but it doesn't look red because it's. So I can't show you my phone, but I can do this. If I can find the right camera, I can do this. Maybe I can. See if I can line them up. That's pretty close. I'm going to call it done though. 8.5. Claudia gives me an 8.5 out of 10. That I get my 8.5 and then I land and I go. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. You know I look forward to it every day. We do it here every day here at 5:30 here on the Sketch and Coffee Live. I don't even know what I'm calling this thing. All I know is I'm drinking coffee with no rum in it. And then we dance. We dance until somebody says they see me dancing so that I know that the log catches up.